Hey guys, today we're going to go over down imaging, down scan, down view, whatever brand you have, whatever they coin it, it's all essentially the same thing. We'll go over the basics and how it works, and then I'll go over a few screenshots with some examples, and then we'll go on the water to actually scan over stuff and kind of see stuff real time and show you how I adjust my settings and what I like to look for. So your biggest difference from 2D sonar is the shape of the beam. In 2D sonar, in some of my previous videos I talked about, you have a cone like this yellow one here. It's going to change diameter based on depth. That's going to change the detail, things of that nature. I know in my 2D video I use the analogy that the cone is kind of like a flashlight beam shining down, and what's illuminated is what's being scanned. Well, with your down imaging, just think of this shape of the beam, but it's razor thin with the light, and that's what's going to help you get a little bit better picture compared to 2D sonar. The way you need to think about this is it's mostly capturing directly what's underneath your boat, but is also getting out to the sides just a little bit. Not much, but I'll kind of go over that in a minute of how that can benefit you. And then like your 2D sonar, you have different frequencies, and that's going to produce more or less detail. It's the same concept. The lower the frequency, the more power you're going to have. It's not as much of an issue for freshwater people as if you were fishing saltwater and really deep. But I usually leave my units on the 800 kilohertz because I do not have a megahertz range. If you have that, that's what I would leave it on for the most part. Because you have such a thin beam and it's not a wide area like 2D sonar as illustrated in this little diagram here, you get better target separation. In this example, they scanned over a large tree that had fallen off of its base. You can see the base of the trunk here at one time. You can see it now sitting in the water. You can see all the branches in here. You can actually see shad grouped up inside of this tree. Drive over this with just 2D sonar. It's all gonna be kind of mixed together. It's gonna be really hard to interpret what's what. You're gonna be able to tell something's there, but it won't be as easy to interpret what you're seeing. So I talked about how the beam not only goes directly underneath your boat, but it kind of goes out to the sides. You can see it a little bit better in this diagram too, but what that gives you is a slight depth perception. So because it's kind of scanning out to the sides a little bit, you start to see a little bit of shadow right here. It's not much, but it does give you the ability to better understand what's happening. All right, I have a few screenshots I'll kind of go over before we go on the water. So you have your down imaging beam. So your transducer is in the upper right-hand corner. That's where it's going to be shooting down from, going down here to the bottom. So your water column is this black area, and then you have the bottom, which is your yellowish tan kind of color. So you have your newest data down here to the right, and you have your oldest data up here to the left. So whatever you see down here in the bottom right hand of this corner is going to be the closest to you. It's going to be the thing that's the most directly underneath your boat at that given time. Any of this through here is all history until it scrolls off the back of the screen. Now Lowrance, you have the option to actually go to the top of the screen and scroll back and view history, and then you can drop waypoints and stuff. I don't know about Garmin and Humminbird if they have that, but that's something you can do in Lowrance. So here you have two little balls of shad, and then you have some crappie, and then you also have a little brush pile, and there's actually some really small little brush piles sticking up through here. Something that this screenshot brings up is kind of how things can look based on the direction that you idle over them. These shad are a good example because they look like they're really tight together, really elongated, and part of that is they could be getting chased around by crappie, getting shifted. They're moving constantly, but it's just a good example of how they can look different. So I'm going to use kind of a silly analogy here, but I think it'll help you get the picture here. So imagine you have a bunch of shad and they're able to line up kind of the shape of a hot dog bun, and they're turned sideways, turned 90 degrees from your boat. As you drive over them, you're only getting a quick little glimpse of them because they're longer perpendicular to your boat than they are with your boat. That's kind of how you can end up with shapes like this. But if they're in that same shape, but they're turned parallel with your boat, so you're driving with them and you're going to scan over a greater distance of them, well then this would be kind of pushed out like this instead of real skinny like this. I have some other screenshots and stuff on the water that shows them in more of the traditional like cloud type shape, as I would call it. So here's a little screenshot of some bass. So basically I was on the main river channel and I drove up onto a ledge and then drove back off of the ledge. So you can see on the left here, this is me driving my boat from the deeper water up to the shallower side. There's a few fish on top of the brake line where it kind of humps over. You can see you have a few little fish on top, but they're kind of blended in. I got my sensitivity turned up a little bit here. But then as I start going off the ledge into the deeper water, you can see another good group of fish here. And this is where your target separation really comes in. You can actually count how many fish are sitting here. You know, it's not going to be picture perfect, and they're not going to be a perfect little blob that looks just like a fish. They just look like little Tic Tacs kind of. But this is what fish look like. This is how bass set up usually. I know these are bass because I caught some out of there, but they're also set up very horizontal like this. With crappie, if I go back here, they are a lot more vertical. You can see how tall these are. They're grouped tight together. This is just how crappie set up. So now we'll go in the water and show you some real examples while we're idling. Now this is a Lowrance. Doesn't matter if you have a Humminbird or a Garmin. It's all basically the same thing. You can argue that some brands are a little bit better at down imaging, and I would agree with that. But that's not the point here. We're just going to talk about how to interpret it and kind of some of the basic settings throughout most of the units. So the first thing I'm going to start with is your frequency on down imaging. I have a structure scan 3D box, so I do not have the ability to change the frequency, but normally if you have a 3-in-1 transducer or an older style of Ranch transducer, or you have a Garmin or a Humminbird, you can change your frequency. Your normal frequency choices are going to be 455, 800 kilohertz, and then on the newer Garmin's and the Mega imaging on Humminbird, you're going to have a megahertz frequency, which is basically in the thousands range. So just remember, the higher the frequency, the less range it's going to have, the less power it's going to have, but the greater detail you're going to have. For down imaging, generally speaking, I'm going to try and keep it on 800, or you're going to put it on your megahertz range, so you just get the best detail possible. Then your range, that's just your depth. That's pretty self-explanatory. I normally just keep it on auto. The Ranch does a pretty good job of kind of adjusting as you needed without it over adjusting. But if you do not like the auto settings, I normally run it 10 feet deeper than what I'm looking for. So I'm looking for something in 20 foot of water, I'm gonna put it on 30 foot on my range. All right, now on the Lowrance, you have what they call contrast. Now some brands are gonna have contrast and sensitivity, so you're gonna have to kind of adjust both to get your picture right. But on Lowrance, you have the option. You have auto, plus, or minus. So that's keeping on auto, and it's gonna add a little bit or subtract a little bit to the sensitivity, basically is what this is. So I normally run on like auto +2 or +3, or just turn it off auto, and you can adjust it on the fly to whatever you want. So as you see, I turn it down, everything gets dull, it's harder to see things off the bottom. If you turn it up, things show up a lot better in the water column. I'll put that back on auto +3, and your advanced options, you're gonna have just surface clarity, and that's just gonna kind of clean up the screen a little bit if you have a lot of things in the water. See, if you turn it on high, it's nothing. If you turn it off, you get a little bit. It doesn't matter. I normally keep it on like low or medium. I would rather see a little bit more and be able to interpret what it is than have a picture perfect screen. That's pretty much my saying for all electronics. And then more options on the Lowrance. There's not much. You have a stop sonar if you want to turn your sonar off. Fish reveal, which is kind of like I equate to fish ID. They put this little like highlight on what's supposed to be a fish, but I prefer just to leave that off. You have range lines you can turn on if you want to see your depth. That's too much clutter. I don't like it. That's pretty much all you need to know on that. Okay, now the next thing you can pick is your palette, and this is arguably going to be one of the most important things. So it doesn't matter what you pick. Pick something that suits your eyes, what you can see well. The one thing you have to keep in mind is what palette you choose. You'll have to adjust your sensitivity a little bit. And I'll kind of show that in an example here. So this is a really bright palette. You can see how hard the bottom is. It shows up, it really returns back. You can see all the shad on here, it's just balls of shad. But if you go to a different palette like this one, see how much more faint all that is? You have to turn your sensitivity up a lot more to see on that particular palette, whereas this one, if you're looking for things in the water column, this palette's really hard to beat on the Lowrance. Now every brand's gonna have something really similar. So just keep that in mind, whatever palette you pick. Things are gonna look a little bit different, and you're gonna have to adjust your settings based on that. Now we're actually gonna go scan some stuff and kind of show you what things look like on down imaging. And before we go any further, I'll just quickly lay out what you have going on here. So let me get this out of the way so we have a full screen. All right, so just like 2D sonar, this is the newest data. This is the oldest data. This black is the water column, and instead of having a cone like 2D sonar, this is a very thin line, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, and then down below the boat. So that's gonna allow it to have a little bit better target separation when you go over things like brush piles, or you're scanning over a ledge and the fish is just barely off the bottom. You're gonna be able to see that a little bit better than you will on 2D sonar, at least definitively. They're gonna show up on 2D sonar, but they're gonna be like connected to the bottom, and you're not always gonna be able to tell, okay, is that a fish or is that just like a rock coming off? But on down imaging, you're going to be able to tell for sure what's what. That didn't take long. Here's actually a couple brush piles real close to each other with a few crappie over top of this. So I'll kind of zoom in just so you can see a little bit better what's going on. So you can see the separation where you can count basically throughout all the fish. And then here's a really good picture of two brush piles right next to each other. You got some shad above it. You can see the density of it a little bit. And over here you can tell that this pile right here is a lot harder than this one. So this is probably more like a bushy cedar almost, where this is like a piece of hardwood. It's got a really strong return on it. Or it could be the blocks that are connected to it that they sunk it with. That could be what that's picking up, but that just kind of shows you what it looks like. You can see there's more bait balls of shad. So these fish in here are feeding on shad. Those look like some more crappie on yet another little pile. So there's all sorts of little brush piles through here, and I'm just standing in front of these docks. There's some more fish strung out across the bottom. That's kind of really how bass look. Whether you can count them them individually, and they look like little Tic Tacs is what I call them. Here we're coming up on something a little bit interesting. You can see on the shore over here was a big laydown, some dock parts. You can kind of see some other parts in here of like dock. There's an old dock that fell down, probably an ice storm or something, and it basically sank, and this is just the rubble of what's left of it. So it's just all sorts of trash. This is a good example though of kind of how down imaging interprets the images a little bit. So if you think about it, you have just a very narrow beam that's say maybe 15 or 20 feet wide. So it has to squeeze all of that information into the screen, into just like a 2D slide. So you're kind of getting a little bit of depth of what's directly underneath the boat, what's a little bit to the left, and just a little bit to the right. Kind of like side imaging, but not to the same extreme. So here's another good thing you can do with down imaging that's really easy. You can do this with 2D as well, but just when you're graphing, pay attention to this. This is a good bottom change right here. So you have much softer, like mud bottom right here, and then this transitions into a very hard rock bottom. So it's just coming up basically on a secondary point is what this is. But that's something you can always look out for. And this transition right here, where it goes from soft to hard, is always a good place to start looking for fish. All right, I'm idling along. We're looking for some more brush piles, and there's one right here. Looks like there's some fish on it. Probably crappie down that deep. You can see a couple over top. What I want to do is kind of show you what the difference is on 2D and down imaging. So you can see on both of them that there are fish around the pile. You can see on 2D sonar you got some decent little arches there, some around it, a little clustered around the back and on top. And on down imaging, essentially you can confirm the same type of things. You can see a relatively decent sized fish there, and you have all these little dots around it that are fish as well. You get a lot better target separation than you do from 2D sonar, where you start to get brush piles and stuff, or even big groups of fish. It's really hard to differentiate what's what, whereas you can start to count fish individually on down imaging and start to figure things out. So again, this is about a 4-foot brush pile, so you know that's kind of what you're looking at on size wise. They're not going to look gigantic. Hopefully this video helps you interpret down imaging. The next one is going to be one I'm looking forward to the most, side imaging, and kind of tying everything together. So go out, do some scanning, adjust your settings, get the picture the best you can, and then, you know, turn around and fish some of the things you find and see what you catch. That's the only way to truly get better and more efficient electronics. And once you start to understand them and you can utilize them, you can eliminate a lot of dead water, especially when you go to a new place that you're not familiar with, help you catch fish a lot easier and a lot more frequently every time you go out.